roll in that candidates run for a backlog and not a specific implementation. And they're then beholden to present weekly demos to the constituency of what they've done to actually make that measure come true, which isn't part of the existing Scrum Bill. So as we work on how to make the rest of Scrum, the demos, the retrospectives, the cleanups, part of the mandatory legal process, we'll then be moving that to the entire legislature. But in Czech, that's already happened. Then at the federal government level, we've already seen in the United States, the Department of Defense write the Agile Manifesto into the procurement law. It is illegal now to have a delivery to the Department of Defense that's not iterative, peoples and interactions over processes and tools. All 4 values and 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto are part of the signed Department of Defense procurement law. Then at the international level, one of the EU countries rewrote their constitution using Scrum in 1 week sprint. It was the fastest they'd ever redeployed their constitution. I don't remember which. It may have been Estonia. And I'm currently talking with the president of one of the European parties and one of the EU delegates from Norway for all of the financial planning of the EU and the business bailout structures. So what's being seen currently in Agile methods, and particularly Scrum globally in government, looks to be completely transformative. And gosh, as a citizen, it looks like my closest bet to actually be voting on an issue and not an implementation. It's not, yes, I'd like a bridge here or a train here. It's, as a person living in this city, I'd like to get to this city in less than 45 minutes. And the candidate then demos how they.
So that all sounds great from the perspective of those people that understand and know Scrum and Agile development and the rest of it. So for the purposes of those general people that aren't particularly familiar with Scrum, as seems to be the case outside of the tech world, what are the advantages that brings to the likes of creating new constitutions, financial planning, that sort of thing? I mean, why bother with Scrum in that scenario? What are the advantages of doing that? Why has it gone into law?
What seems to be becoming more visible is Scrum as a method for collaboration allows a group of people from 1 to N, it seems to be going up to tens of thousands of people, to participate very efficiently. It looks to be a scaling method for communication, to have a single focused output with a balanced review of the measures required to make this pass legally in a really fast way. Collaborative aspects of Scrum and scaling Scrum through Meta Scrum and Scrum of Scrums seems to allow in less than a week tens of thousands of individuals to be able to weigh in on the areas that are most important and then have a passable solution at the end that everyone can sign up for and see, which looks like previous forms of organizing people had difficulty achieving that many folks getting their vision statement endorsed and ratified by a large group. And
so from a practical standpoint, Scrum, as I know it from the software development world, requires breaking work down into relatively small pieces of work. Is that practical then, do you think? And well, clearly it's been done, but how does that happen with law and with various other common policy areas that you're talking about?
Luckily, it seems easier. I'm learning as I'm diving into this myself. It's easier for large groups of people to agree on the value statements. It's the implementations that seem to get people stuck. So if they say, as a person living in this city, I'd like to get to this city in less than 45 minutes, it seems that it's relatively easy for the groups using affinity estimation to rank that versus other concerns as they're talking about budgeting in the government level. So is this worth X? Is this worth Y? The values seem to be easier. And the facilitation methods many of us are using for Agile projects seem to fit well. Mm-hmm. Then when it comes to the implementation, just like we see in software projects using Agile methods, you might have 2 architects with very different opinions, and they might argue for 3 hours and drag the whole rest of the team in. But by focusing on the value, it seems people can agree on what the value they want very quickly. Then for the implementation, using personas to say for which persona are we solving next, and we'll solve for another persona just in the next sprint. It allows people to say, oh, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. We can actually have a delivery in this week that will meet these personas in the room. These other personas, here's where they are in the product backlog, and they'll be served in priority order. And that makes people say, I don't have to block this bill because it doesn't serve me or my business. It will serve me and my business in this order. And the visible backlog seems to allow people.
So it's not breaking the work down further per se. It's just reducing the amount of argument that happens because actually you can just try out different options. So it's more about enabling innovation in that space as opposed to changing the efficiency, say.
Well, Ray, I would agree with you that the breakdown of the value statements is also not common in the government level. Often it's a package of particular implementations. So splitting by value and ranking the values independently does seem to be valuable on its own. But then the collaborative tools to allow a mass of people to interact with that the Agile community has been doing over the years, like affinity estimation and like planning poker using the Delphi method, seem to fit here just as well as they do in multi.
Cool. Yeah, quite. So I'm going to move us swiftly on since we started slightly late to the next question we've got, which kind of expand the topic a bit further. So the next question we've got is Scrum everywhere. Why do technology-based Scrum teams benefit when the whole company gets Scrum? So I guess another interpretation of that might be, what are the limitations imposed upon tech teams implementing Scrum when the company doesn't get it? So Simon, do you want to kick off on that one a little bit?
To me, a lot of it's got to do with just empathy, because it's an interesting thing. So the Scrum Alliance, as an example, has the tagline, transforming the world of work. And I think a lot of people think that's empty rhetoric. And it's not really until a certain way into their Scrum adoption that teams really begin to get, it's not a tweak, it's a fundamental paradigm shift and a change. And that people that are outside of that change bubble often have no empathy for what's going on inside it and can't relate to it. And so because they can't relate to it, it's a clash of cultures, and they don't know how to interface with it. They don't know how to interpret the information coming out of it. And they have different relationships to some of the things Joe was talking about, like priority and value and all that sort of stuff like that.
Yeah, so you end up with, well, if you don't have that feedback loop, I guess for the wider organization that from a technology standpoint we're working for, then there's that disconnect and we end up delivering the wrong thing. I guess that's where you're heading with that?
It's more than just delivering the wrong thing. It's seeing things as completely alien and going back to trying to observe the old behaviors. So going in and, a classic example is traditional managers reaching into a JIRA and looking up for sprint backlog tasks and running after people and go, that's estimated at 3 hours. Did you get it done by 11 o'clock and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And completely focusing on the wrong things.
From a process and methodology standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the outcome of that is you don't end up with the cultural changes that you want as a result of the Scrum adoption. You don't end up with the behaviors that you want overall in the organization. And I guess it's very easy to then derail the teams that are kind of trying to use Scrum in a local context if kind of the wider organization is still effectively micromanaging as you've described.
Oh, absolutely. I call that organizational antibodies. And it's fundamentally why a lot of Agile adoptions collapse after the coaches leave, because they're effectively the immunosuppressants in that scenario.
Right.
And they're holding back the organizational thing, and then eventually you stop taking them, and then the larger organization rejects the Scrum transfusion.
I might steal that analogy myself. I've come across the same problem in a number of clients I've worked with, where you kind of end up with a lot of ground up Scrum adoption without the managerial support to back it up. And there's some organizations where sometimes you've got the kind of CE on board and your senior leadership team, and then actually it's just the middle management layer that are problematic, and you end up with the same problem in effect, because it kind of making it impossible from both ends of the stack. But yeah, that's certainly something common I've come across. Is that something you've seen, Joe, in your interactions?
I'd absolutely agree with what you, Ray, and Simon have been saying. It seems to take a coach, and as Simon pointed out, when the coaches leave, sometimes the agility leaves, which is why I'd say the coach needs to be internal and employed. Scrum Inc., when we engage with companies now, we ask for a coach for every 5 teams to be provided by the client full-time, where their only job is to shadow the Scrum Inc. coaches and trainers when we're on site, so that they have full-time coaches, at least one for every 5 teams. Yahoo indexed the financial value of this. They recorded of their trained Scrum teams, if they weren't given a Scrum coach, their acceleration was 35%. Now that's a whole lot, and for teams that measured velocity, that was exciting enough. But for their teams that had a full-time Scrum coach, and by that, again, it was a coach for 5 teams or less, teams that had a coach for 20 teams, there was no measurable effect. But coaches for one per every 5 teams, their acceleration was 300 to 500%, 400% on average. Quad velocity, higher quality as well. The teams also reported they had more fun doing it and they had higher engagement at work. That's the type of win everybody would wish, right? Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time. But that took persistent internal coaches. So when we come in to coach and train a company now, we ask on the statement of work, please provide your internal coaches, full-time people who already know your business, to pair with us. And our job is essentially to train the coaches, not to coach the organization. And that seems to be a model that persists. But I'd like to share another model as well. Bosch. Bosch is a 370, 100,000 person company, and they're in the middle of an agile transformation. In fact, they're quite far along across the entire company. Hardware, software, management, finance, HR, procurement, every aspect. For them, it comes directly from the chairman of the board, Volkmar Denner. He called my cell phone last November, and that's not usual for me. I'll have division CEOs call me, but this was the CEO of the entire company. He called my cell phone and said, Joe, I've just retired all personal performance bonuses as of January 2016. And I want to fly you out to Stuttgart to tell all my 500 division CEOs why I just did that. So we talked more on the phone, and it turns out those bonuses were all replaced with team incentives that were tied to total company profitability in order to disincent silos, to actually destroy them financially. And it looks like it worked. So it was an easy sell for me to say to his top 500, let's bonus ourselves based on total company performance. And with that, agility appears to be sticking.
So that's, that's fundamentally about optimizing the company as a whole rather than as individual divisions then. So that's one example of clearly a disincentivization in that area.
In that case, Scrum also attached Scrum coaches across every division. They have an internal coaching practice of full-time Bosch employees. And when they have an organization like Scrum Inc. come in, it's to train and coach their internal coaches and trainers so that it's so they're not outsourcing their agility. They bring in experts from the industry to help skill up their internal folks, but their agile practice, their coaches and trainers, that's a core part of.
And that's across the board or just technology? I mean, Bosch is primarily a technology company, but that is across all the business areas?
Tools, that's manufacturing, the machines that make the machines. That's business strategy, the board of directors, the board of advisors. I was talking to them about Meta Scrum and having the CEO's office prioritize the backlog for the entire company, and it looks like that's happening.
Is that at a presumably not at a kind of day-to-day fine-grain level? What might appear on that backlog, for example?
Oh, at the top level, it's missions and goals for the company. We'd like to grow ourselves in the autonomous vehicle space might be an example. Or we'd like to acquire other key providers to become more vertically integrated in power tools for the European market would be an example. Those would be single backlog items. Like as Bosch, we'd like to become the default provider of autonomous vehicle controls for the coming autonomous vehicle renaissance for all OEMs. That would be a user story potentially that could.
So that's presumably they're not actually using Scrum at that level. They're using some of the techniques. They're creating a backlog. They're prioritizing, and they're defining individual achievable tasks. But presumably they're not achieving that within a short period of time, and they're not. That's not the entire company as a whole feeding into. There's subdivision beyond that of those tasks.
It appears to be exactly Scrum, with a daily stand-up at the top level, a retrospective at the end of 1 week to say, how are we going to make the company faster and happier, a demo of the current state of those major epics. And those epics, just like a release burn down in an individual team, are then updated. Looks like the model with which to go. So it looks pure play Scrum, 3 roles, 5 meetings, 3 outputs, exactly the Scrum Guide's definition.
Okay. So then, focusing back on the question, how does that, clearly they are getting that at the top level. How does that then affect the kind of technology-based Scrum teams on the ground?
It looks like the ability to escalate impediments up to top management allows each individual team to actually respond to retrospectives that involve a maturation of company structure. So while teams themselves are able to work on impediments that have to do with, should we try pair development? Should we try a different definition of ready for our user stories, whether it's hardware or software? But when they have impediments like, why am I getting support requests for project B when I'm told project A is the top priority? Why am I being told to multitask and not swarm? Those types of impediments can now be escalated, it looks like, to top management and actually removed. Or impediments like, how come we have siloing and Power Tools North America is asking me to design and build tools this way, whereas Power Tools Germany is asking me to design and build tools this other conflicting way? How do I optimize Power Tools when I'm getting business cases that are conflicting because they have silos that are independently bonused in the previous world, right? Well, it looks like those impediments are able to be handed directly up to the board that actually makes structural decisions for the company and acted on. And Volkmar Denner retiring individual incentives that are based on a silo and that being removed appears to be an actual effective use of Scrums at the team level, bubbling up that impediments to actually change the structure of the company.
Okay. What's interesting in that, though, is it sounds to me like despite using Scrum and escalating impediments and using a lot of techniques there, it doesn't sound like they're actually decentralizing control much. It still requires those impediments to go all the way out to the board to make a call on, are they going to use Power Tool structure A or B? Now they have a coaching practice, of course. Looks like for financial decisions, they do want a single ringable neck, an ultimate product owner. And for them, it looks like that product owner is the chairman of the board, the CEO. Now, that person is fed by a meta scrum with product owners and then product owners of product owners all the way down for teams at every level. Many impediments are removed by their coaching office, it sure looks like, but it looks like some impediments having to do with the structure of the company. They actually have a single decision maker. That said, it looks like that single decision maker can make decisions within 1 week. Gentlemen, absolutely my apologies. It looks like I have an early exploded time box. Where I am, it's only 6:29 p.m., but it looks like I actually have to pull the chute. Luckily for this Blab, it looks like Simon and Ray get to continue discussing Scrum and its future of work all around the world. And I look forward to people sending emails to info@scruminc.com with follow-on questions if that's helpful.